In today's video, I'm going to be talking through my evidence for Teaching Standard 2, promoting good progress and outcomes by pupils. In terms of my starting position and my lesson delivery, my mentor noted that my pupils perhaps weren't understanding how to make progress or indeed when they'd made progress. And for me, a lot of this comes down to the fact that I wasn't making what I wanted them to learn explicit enough, and coming from a coaching background, I would often get distracted with other aspects of the sport that I was teaching rather than dialing in on what I wanted pupils to learn in relation to the learning objectives. So although I visually saw progress, I didn't do a great job in communicating this to the pupils and didn't do a very good job of mapping their learning journey or how they'd made progress. One of the things that my mentor had me do was to observe another trainee teacher and to observe how well he was promoting good progress and outcomes within his lesson, and compare and contrast this to an observed lesson of my mentor and how he was doing it. So, for example, although think pair share is something I have seen before, by rounding this up in terms of explicitly saying to a pupil, because you've said X, Y, Z, that tells me that you've achieved the bronze objective, which is 1, 2, 3. In order to hit silver, you will need to do whatever it is. And my mentor used this opportunity to frame to me how I talk to pupils in terms of making them appreciate that they have hit the learning objectives and what they need to do moving forwards. So in comparison to my mentor's lesson, for example, he often used he'd often have pupils fill in diagrams, but he would also explicitly communicate when pupils were moving on to a specific learning outcome within a given task. And this was something that my mentor wanted me to adopt. So when it came to not just talking about the technical aspect of a task or a tactical aspect of the task, my mentor recommended that I use any transition time as an opportunity to communicate what specifically I was looking for, what would determine success, and how would pupils know whether or not they had been successful. So when it came to framing activities, framing my questioning, this was something that I wanted to keep in mind at all times. So as you can see from the lesson plan here, which was on rugby, and specifically was on passing in rugby, between each transition phase, my mentor wanted me to specifically highlight key success criteria, and if that meant taking this out on a whiteboard and referring back to it, then at least this gave me the means of being able to do so, and making sure every pupil is aware of the learning objectives at the start, the middle, and the end of the lesson. So even simple things like asking pupils to remind me of the bronze objective was just a good way of seeing which pupils were listening, to what extent I actually had made these outcomes explicit, and by explicitly communicating the success criteria that I was after. And this also led me to improving my ability to promote good progress amongst pupils who are higher ability in nature, and specifically planning questions for lower attaining pupils and higher attaining pupils, and getting them to communicate with each other to help stretch their learning. So in terms of my lesson reflections for the lesson in question, I noticed that I'd kind of hit a stumbling block with lower attaining pupils, as it took me quite a while to get them into an activity. And again, one of the reflections I have for this lesson in particular was that it's almost too simplistic just to have pupils who are all of the same ability within teams, so segregating in terms of lower ability and higher ability. And actually sometimes by mixing pupils, it can promote good outcomes in itself. So as I said, even though I appreciate that learning isn't linear, and it's not always going to be the case that you, for example, do bronze, then silver, then gold, my mentor still wanted me to focus on the transition between my activities and using this as a means of determining whether or not pupils had hit the learning objectives. So for example, once we move into an activity that I've designed for the silver, are they actually in a position to move on to it? Have they actually hit bronze